Thank you everyone for attending this evening's facilities and planning meeting. I appreciate that. Second meeting of the school year for facilities planning. Just would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people, the Coast Salish people, and we thank them and acknowledge them for us being able to work on their territories. Meeting is being live streamed, and the audio and visual recording will also be available to the public for viewing after the meeting. The footage of the meeting may be viewed outside and inside of Canada. Before I begin, I'd just like to remind everyone, as we stay in all our committee meetings and board meetings, with regards to meeting decorum, and this goes for, usually it's for the members, but for most everyone else, we strive to have a safe environment where everyone can feel comfortable in expressing their views, whatever they may be. The board has a strong commitment to ethical conduct, includes the responsibility of committee members to conduct themselves with appropriate decorum and professionalism. So as chair, I am committed to that task to ensure that this meeting is maintained with decorum. To do that, I ask that all members and delegates request to speak through the chair, which means not to have members crosstalk, everything directed through the chair. Civility towards others is maintained as stakeholder representatives and trustees share perspectives and participate in debate. And it's in the minutes, in the agenda, so details of the decorum is listed there. So thank you everyone for adhering to safe and respectful and meeting decorum for this meeting. I will be a little later after I go through some of the changes in the agenda, movement in the agenda to provide for a smoother flow. I will be moving with regards to the agenda item, track and field strategy presenter delegation first. Then we will have item 4.1, Vancouver Park Board track and field strategy presentation by staff, and we will dispense with that agenda item first. Then we will combine the Queen Elizabeth Annex closure, the 4 delegations, and then move right into 4.2, which is consideration of closure of Queen Elizabeth Annex, so that everyone, so the delegations come right before the presentation. Then we'll follow through with the rest of the meeting, agenda item number 2, 3, and 5. Okay, so for everyone here, this is Planning and Facilities Committee around the table here, and I'll have everyone introduce themselves so everyone knows who is who. I'm Alan Wong, Chair of Facilities and Planning and one of the trustees. Go this way.
Mosquino, Director of Facilities.
Carmen Cho, Trustee and Committee Member.
Oliver Hansen, Trustee and Committee Member.
Estrelita Gonzalez, Trustee. Barb Parrott, Trustee.
Joshua Harris, Trustee. Treasurer.
Janet Fraser, Trustee.
Jennifer Reddy, Trustee and Committee Member.
Lisa Landry, Assistant Secretary Treasurer.
And could we have staff on the side, please?
Adrian Keogh, Director of Instruction, Educational Programs.
David Nelson, Deputy Superintendent.
John Dawson, Director of Educational Planning.
And Superintendent on this side. And thank you. All right, first delegation is track and field strategy. The presenter is Aaron Embley from Vancouver Park Board. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Do I, in terms of advancing the slides, is that you have it? Okay. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the track and field strategy, which is a presentation that we gave to the Vancouver Park Board on September 30th, and they did adopt the recommendations at that time. As you can see, the recommendations from the Park Board also included concurrence with this board in terms of the sites that impact the school board. So our next slide. So, yep, there we go. A bit of the background is that in 2016, the Park Board passed a motion directing staff to look at constructing a competitive track and field facility. The support for that motion was about working with the sport community and reporting back to the board on recommendations, both for citing a new track and field facility and looking at the 10-year implementation of that strategy. There was also support through the strategy and coming up to this point of the historical work between the Park Board and the school board on advancing track and field and other sports, and supporting the existing strategies like the Healthy City strategy, the sports strategy, and Van Play, which is actually going to the Park Board tonight, so which sets a clear direction in terms of our provision of parks and recreation services. So the existing complement of track and field facilities exists across the city, with half of the existing sites on school board land and half of them on park board land. And they're all shown on the map right there. The sort of the blue colored dots show the park board sites, and the blacks are the school board sites. So in terms of part of the rationale in terms of why we see track and field being important in the city, we recognize some of the benefits of sports in general for children. As I'm sure you've probably heard before, it expands their capacity for learning, helps them deal with stress and anxiety. They play better together amongst themselves, builds individual self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-discipline. And beyond children, with that core values and participation as a child, it builds adults who are healthier, have stronger social ties, and a greater sense of well-being. And the children or people who become active in sports as children are more likely to carry on as adults, as opposed to trying to start becoming more active as an adult. And then we recognize that track and field in particular is very inclusive and low barrier. There's many different types of sports and activities you can do. All body types and interests and abilities have a home within track and field, whether it's jumping, throwing, or running. It's very inclusive. And again, if you have a pair of sneakers, you can participate. So this slide here shows you the timeline in terms of our process of building the track and field strategy. We began in the spring and summer of 2018 and had 3 different phases of work as we built the strategy and consulted the public throughout that process, with the last process being this spring, where we went out to a lot of track and field events and to parks and went to a couple of PAC meetings and talked to a lot of people. And so now we're here looking to get support from the school board. In terms of the strategy and what its direction provides, it starts with 6 principles that underpin the recommendations within. So starting with providing equitable access, looking at strengthening partnerships with the school board, park board partnership being highlighted by many people in surveys. Supporting the growth of track and field as a sport within Vancouver, complementing citywide initiatives and recreation strategies, recognizing that there's a lot going on at a lot of different sites. We really want to complement and work with a lot of that energy that's already being put into these other programs. We want to inspire all athletes and recognize it's for everyone, and then celebrate the past and foster the future. There is a strong history of track and field in the city, and we want to grow from that. So one of the general pieces of the strategy is the 3 categories of tracks that we've identified. We've identified them as a C category, B, and an A. So C would be your sort of your neighborhood track. It doesn't have to meet a set standard, but it's got low impact surfacing, hopefully long jump pits, wayfinding and signage, and site furnishings. So anyone can get out there, run, jump, walk, and that opportunity exists year round on all times of day. As you get into a category B facility, again, a bit more rigorous, you hopefully have, we hope we're looking for six lanes, low impact surface, maybe some temporary seating space, storage space. We would want washrooms, lighting, and again, a larger complement of jumping and throwing event space. And then you get to the category A, again, it has everything that a category C or category B has. And in addition to, it's got your 8 lanes, it's got spectator seating, full complement of jumping and throwing space, and can host regional, provincial events. So we use those classifications to categorize each of the 14 sites in the city. And you can see that based on the dots, that the blue dots are category C, the sort of teal dots would be a category B, and then a premier category A facilities with the brown dot, and they're showing up here at Churchill Secondary and at Vancouver Technical Secondary. So in terms of our engagement results, we contacted had interactions with over 4,000 people, as I mentioned, through all 3 phases of the strategy. And those included all the different events that I mentioned in terms of online surveys at all 3 points within the strategy, and had generally very high support across the board for the site locations for category A facilities and the general sort of drivers and recommendations about who we were trying to reach and how we might reach them to reach our goals. We were also worked quite closely with an advisory group, and so you can see the list there of all the different members that were participated within our advisory group. And I think we had 5 or maybe 6 meetings, and included park board staff as well as teachers in that advisory group, and they were instrumental in making sure that we identified those key pieces that were really going to take our strategy to the next level and really be inclusive of wheelchair sport athletes and understand the needs of children versus, senior athletes, and hosting games versus, working well with multi-users, the needs for the infield versus, throwing events, those types of things. So it was a really important part of the process and really helped the strategy. So I think that's my last slide. It kind of gives you a bit of an overview. There's a lot of information also in the strategy itself, but I can also answer any specific questions you have.
Thank you, Erin. I should have been a little clearer with regards to delegations earlier, and thank you for being within the 10-minute. We were going to hit a 1-minute buzzer prior to the 10-minute mark. The delegations period is a time for stakeholder groups, members, to ask you questions. So if you be so gracious if you could stay for that. Also would like to invite Harp Soe, Director of Athletics Coordinator, if he would like to join us as well, in case anyone has questions for Harp as well. He's the Vancouver District's Athletic Coordinator. Thank you, Harp. All right, so I'll open up for anyone who has any direct questions with regards to track and field strategy prior to staff presenting their report. Well, that's easy. Oh, all right, Terry.
Yes, just through the chair, I understand that there was an advisory group. In fact, I think the outlines or the makeup of the group is still up on the screen. I was just wondering if you could describe, and I may have missed it previously, but how teachers were included in the advisory group. Yeah, either one of you.
Sure. So I helped to select the teachers through both our elementary and our secondary groups. So Jillian Wilson Haffenden, who's very active in both cross country and track at the elementary level, was our delegate at the elementary school level, and the secondary schools decided to send Stan Jang, who's not a teacher, but he's instrumental in both, again, our cross country and our track and field meets and organization. So Paul Skarsgård, who's the convener for secondary, elected to have Stan attend in his position, I guess.
Thank you. Estrelita?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, just a question. Once they're built, and sort of what the reality is of how they'll be used, how they shared between VSB and Park Board. How do you manage that? And also the maintenance piece, who looks after them?
Thank you. Good question. The track and field, we assume, will follow a shared use agreement. That's how we've sort of proposed this going forward, is that once approved by both the park board and the school board, that we will work together to develop a shared use agreement similar to that we have with our artificial turf fields. Like the one at Kitts Secondary and at Vancouver Technical Secondary. And generally how those operate is that the schools have sole use of them from the morning through till about 5 p.m. on school days, and then the park board manages and books the facilities out in the evenings and weekends. So it would follow a similar process. We'd expect too that the park board would lead the maintenance, and in terms of any cost sharing going forward, I think that would get developed through the shared use agreement, but the capital for building the facilities is all already allocated through the city's capital plan.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, would you mind talking a little bit more about what comes next for you guys? What are the next steps in regards to this? If that makes.
Sure. I think some of that will come through from the report that's coming, but we have identified that our capital plan, which we have with other pieces, there's a track and field element that's got $10 million allocated to it, and then some other pieces for sort of ancillary buildings and resurfacing takes it to just over 11 million. So we have targeted both Vancouver Technical Secondary and then upgrades at Kitts or Point Grey Secondary, sorry, and then upgrades at Templeton Secondary as well. Sort of a Class A, a Class B, and a Class C would all receive some funding, and then we would use the implementation identified through the strategy for subsequent capital plans, where we would ask for further dollars to continue to implement the plan.
Thank you. Janet?
For the 3 sites, there are a number of different steps moving forward. Do you have a sense of the timeline for when these sites would be available for use?
We don't yet have a specific timeline in terms of when the construction would happen. So I think if we're kind of considering when the impact would be to students, we would try and minimize that. We do have some limitations. However, anywhere there's going to be a rubberized surface, there's a certain temperature changing. It's got to be like a rising temperature in a period of time with enough heat to sort of let that surface cure. So we are going to be tied into some technical requirements. But however, we do have a couple of steps, especially for the Vancouver technical site, where we would need to go out and do a detailed design and come back to our board at that point. And then when we go to tender, we would have to then bring back that contract award to our board. So there'd be 2 more touch points there. And for the other 2 sites, we would be coming back to the board for contract award because they would exceed, the budgets would exceed our limit.
Thank you. Back to Josh.
My sincere apologies if you already covered it, but you guys talk a bit about how you define the criteria for choosing those particular schools for your Class A, B, and C plans?
I guess I did not cover that in this presentation, but it is in the report. And so there are elements that were, it was a 3-phase process. And so some of the early phase was basically when you're looking at a Class A facility, the sheer size of that facility made many of the sites not possible, as well as activities that are already planned or projects that were going on some of those sites, as well as even in tenure. So both Camosun and Brockton Oval, we don't have the long-term land tenure, and we have things like the Stanley Park Master Plan that are ongoing. So certain locations weren't available. And then we started looking at things like transit accessibility, equity of provision of service across the city. It is mapped out in the strategy, but it kind of follows that type of a process.
Thank you, Erin. That's it. Just want to thank you, and if you can bring back to the commissioners and the board, we appreciate the looking at the sites and the 2 out of 3 sites that's connected, and the collaboration with the board, with both boards. So we very much appreciate it, and it helps our students in Vancouver. So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you, Harp. I think you're looking for some trustees to come to the cross country as well, and that's coming up. we'll try to accommodate, but thank you very much. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Hart. We're going to move to item 4.1, and the Vancouver Park Board Track and Field Strategy, and Jim Machino will be presenting. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. And this report does contain a recommendation. And starting off, it does reference the strategic plan in a number of areas. Goal 1, engaging our learners through innovative teaching and learning practices. Goal number 3, creating a culture of care and shared social responsibility. And goal number 4, providing effective leadership, governance, and stewardship. On September 11, 2019, staff presented a report to the Facilities Planning Committee titled Vancouver Park Board Strategy. The report identified that since June 2018, we've been working with the Vancouver Park Board on conducting several consultations regarding the Park Board's track and field strategy. The report also noted that the Vancouver Park Board had allocated funds in this current year plan, to achieve a number of initiatives. What the survey did identify is which sites would be best to utilize those funds. So as noted by Aaron, the capital plan that they have in place would be just over $11 million and would be able to deliver Class A, Class B, and a Class C facility. And as Aaron indicated, the Class A would be Vancouver Tech. The Class B would be Point Grey. And it's located next to Kerrisdale Park, so that's why the report indicates Kerrisdale Park, Point Grey. And the third project would be Templeton Park Track. Now that track is right next to Templeton Secondary School and Templeton Pool. The only differentiation is that that track is on Park Board land versus VSB land. So we're not seeking a recommendation on Templeton here tonight, but we are seeking a recommendation on the other two because they are on VSB property. The report also identified that there's a very strong synergy, and Aaron identified that with tracks and VSB sites, because they can be used by students during the day and by the general public and track teams during evenings and weekends. So we end up getting a really well-used facility, and having it adjacent to our school or near our school means that there's less travel for our students to attend or to participate in track events. So as Aaron pointed out, on September 30th, the Park Board did pass the 4 motions that are indicated on page 2 of your report. The 2 motions that are specific to us are motions B and C of your report. And motion B is Vancouver Technical Secondary School for category A, and recommendation C, which is a resurfacing of the Point Grey Kerrisdale Park track, as well as other amenities to be added to that site. Page 3 of your report identifies the 3 categories of track, which Aaron pointed out, but it's got a little more specific information on that page as to what's included in each category of track. So page 4, and there was a question regarding this. Page 4 identifies the next steps if the board approves the recommendations tonight for both Vancouver Tech and for Point Grey Secondary. And those, they're itemized on page 4 as starting with developing a shared use agreement with the VBE. That's the number 1 item on for both projects. We would commence working on that shared use agreement. Again, we do have examples of these shared use agreements for other shared amenities that we have with the Park Board, like the synthetic or artificial turf fields. So just summarizing a bit of the consultation, I won't go into full depth here because I think Aaron did a fantastic job, but I'll mention that the feedback from the community consultation is to expand opportunities for people of all abilities. Right now, most of our sites aren't accessible, so that would be an improvement. To improve the geographic distribution of facilities, Currently, we only have the Point Grey, that's a rubberized track. The most desirable upgrade across the facility levels and surface improvements was seen as a key item, again, because we only have the one rubberized track at Point Grey. And the fourth feedback item was strengthening partnerships. And the stakeholders that we met and the public really saw a benefit in the park board and the school board strengthening their partnership in these outdoor uses for both school and for the community. Just a little bit of detail, and I got these statistics from HARP, and that's on page 5. We currently have 68 public elementary schools participating in elementary school zone track meets, and they're usually hosted at Point Grey, Churchill, Hamburg, Vancouver Tech, and Swan Garden. And there's approximately 19 public schools with a total of 2,030 students participating in track league and championship in 2018. And most of these events are at Kerrisdale Point Grey. So the next section of the report details what the key findings were of the consultation. And for Vancouver Tech, one of the key findings was there was an interest in upgrading Van Tech facility so it could host district meets. So currently, many of our district meets have to be off-site, either at UBC or Swan Garden. So this would give the opportunity for Vancouver to have its own place where it can host its own district meets. For Point Grey, the short-term need was to resurface Point Grey track because it sees a really heavy level of use, and it's at the end of its life. So resurfacing Point Grey would give 2 rubberized tracks, one on the east side and one on the west side. Just concluding the report, and Aaron spoke about this to a certain extent. So to support the growth of track and field in Vancouver, it is in fact increasing physical activity. Unlike most sports, track and field offers a very low barrier cost of entry. A student with a pair of sneakers or runners can train year-round, almost any type of weather, and it can do that independently or with a group, which makes it very flexible. The proposed improvements would be a catalyst for increasing participation from elementary and secondary school students in track and field. Funding for the track, the park board proposed that they would cover all capital costs. There's a breakdown on page 6. Vancouver Tech for the level A facility would be about 6 to 7 million, Point Grey 3 to 4 million, and Templeton Park again, which would be completed on park board land, would be about 1 to 2 million for a total of expenditure of about 10 to 13 million. So through the chair, the 2 recommendations for tonight are that the board approve Vancouver Park Board funding improvements to Vancouver Tech Secondary as the site for building a new Category A track and field facility as described in Appendix A, subject to a shared use agreement. Recommendation B is that the Park Board approve Vancouver Park Board funded prioritization of upgrades to track and field at Kerrisdale Park Point Grey Secondary to bring it in line with the Category B facility, subject to a shared use agreement with the Vancouver Park Board.
Thank you very much for the report, Jim. Open it up for committee members. Any questions, comments with regards to the 2 motions going to the board, or any more in general questions? Amanda.
Hi, through the chair, I was just wondering, with Point Grey's in the PDR process for the seismic, will that have any impact?
Jim?
Through the chair, we don't envision an impact with the seismic program at Point Grey.
All right, no further questions. Move this to the board. I think I see support. Yes, all right, moving to the board. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jim, for the report and good news. Thank you, Aaron. Moving back to the delegations, 1.2, 3, 4, and 5, Queen Elizabeth Annex closure. We will have the delegates present. Same thing, 10 minutes for each delegation. And if the delegations could stay at the end for any stakeholder or any committee members that have any direct questions about your presentation, that would be appreciated. Directly after all 4 presentations, we will have staff's presentation, their report. And at that time, the report and the questions and the comments are with committee members directly. Okay. So delegation number 1.2, Sean Kelly, Chair of Vancouver DPAC. Sean, thank you. And Sean, I received your email and I forwarded it out to all the trustees half an hour ago. So forgive us if we didn't all read it prior to that, but we got the general topics in our report. Thanks. You would have asked for it, so I just beat you to it.
Is that better? Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight on behalf of DPAC. In 2016, I addressed this committee on behalf of DPAC regarding the long-range facilities plan. We took umbrage with the ministry of the day over a number of issues. We also took umbrage with the VSB for producing a report that sacrificed the language of education for the language of economic efficiency. 3.5 years later, the language of economic efficiency has seeped deeper into the VSB's lexicon to the point where schools are really talked about and reports refer to, quote, old buildings, which comprise the VSB's asset inventory. While the transformation of schools into depreciated assets is troubling unto itself, when paired with an overemphasis on financial and asset management, we run the risk of losing sight that the VSB is first and foremost here to serve our children as part of a social contract that places a premium on public education. That's what I'm here to talk about this evening. And in particular, I'm here to speak to our elected trustees about what they can do to ensure that our children and our children's children are at the center of all decision making. And I'll do this using the proposed closure of Queen Elizabeth Annex as an example. The key point I want to make is that we need you as the board to articulate a high-level vision that reflects the shared values around public education in this district. And through the superintendent, align staff efforts with that vision. Such a vision needs to put our children at the center of all decision making. In the absence of such a high-level vision, I believe you will continue to flounder on important decisions and projects such as the L Rfp, and other people will end up making important decisions for you. As individual trustees, there are at least 4 skills we believe are critical to successfully carrying out your work, but which are not as yet frequently or consistently visible. The first of these core skills is to ask questions. Many people were surprised and some of us deeply disappointed when trustees did not ask a single question at the board meeting on the recommendation to consider closing QEA. We know that some of you had questions, and both DPAC and the QEA PAC had raised questions in emails to you. We also know that staff had come to the meeting prepared to answer questions, and yet no questions were asked, and the recommendation was moved to committee seemingly by inertia rather than by intention. There are several key questions that trustees should be asking. The most important is, what benefits and harms would be incurred by the children directly affected by a proposed change? This needs to be factored heavily, I think, into decision making, and I know the QEA and JQ PACs will in part speak to this when they present. I will say, though, that at the last board meeting, we heard Trustee Fraser talk about the opportunity to use the closure of QEA to raise capital funds through a long-term lease to the CSF, but we didn't hear any trustees talk about children. So score 1 for economics and 0 for children. When the question of benefits and harms to children has been raised, the next question, whether or not a proposal is in the VSB's best interest as a corporate body, should be brought forward, paired with asking whether it is something the VSB must do and for what reasons, or if it is something the VSB may but doesn't necessarily have to do. Closing QEA is not mandated of the VSB. It's a choice that the VSB has been given to make, and the ruling in the CSF court case was clear. It's acceptable for the VSB to act in its own best interests, even when those best interests conflict with the CSF's interests. When the board refers the motion to committee, it should state positively its belief that the recommendation is one that the VSB should undertake and provide an explicit affirmation of the rationale. The actual rationale for considering the closure of QEA is not clearly stated, and we affirm this by speaking with trustees and learning that some understand it differently than others. This lack of uniformity in the understanding by trustees implies that the rationale demands clarification and simplification. Which brings me to the next item. The second critical skill trustees must exercise is to challenge assumptions. This obviously has to be done respectfully, and I'm personally not always very good at it, but it must be done. If I was to offer a single observation about what has held the board back over the last 2 years, it's that you seem utterly terrified to challenge information that's presented to you. Challenging assumptions involves testing the logical connections between assertions and conclusions. It requires inquiring whether or not all factors have been accounted for. It requires that you ask whether or not all the information needed to make a decision has been made available to you. It involves looking for ways to independently verify data or to bring alternate data sources forward. This often requires time, and trustees should not be afraid to say they need more time to make a decision. We've witnessed important decisions brought before the board to be decided in what can only be described as whirlwind fashion. In talking to trustees about QEA, I was impressed that some had arranged to visit Jules Quinnell to see the school for themselves, to see if the physical space reconciles with the staff report. That's the kind of engagement we need from all trustees, not just some. Choosing to not challenge assumptions gives rise to the belief that the board is just an extension of the corporate body of the school board, and makes it easier to argue that the elected school boards are extraneous and should be eliminated, as is currently being argued in Quebec. The third critical skill the trustees must practice is to examine whether or not the processes you are required to follow allow you to make the right decisions. The recommendation to consider closing QEA marks the first time Policy 14, school closure, is being invoked since it was adopted, and therefore the first time it can be examined for fitness. My hope is that every trustee is taking notes about whether or not Policy 14 is guiding their actions as they expect it to, and whether it provides enough options and direction for solid decision making. If trustees find that Policy 14 does not live up to expectations, then I hope they will raise the issues and propose changes to improve it. One observation we have offered to some trustees is that the policy appears to force a binary choice at key junctures. First, when the decision to proceed to committee or not is made, and second, when the decision of whether to proceed to consultation or not is made. Creating a third choice, wherein those decisions can be deferred until more information can be gathered, might be desired by the board going forward. The fourth and final critical skill is to practice transparency and insist on transparency in other people and in processes. Transparency builds trust and is stated as being one of the district's guiding principles. Your stakeholders and the general public need to know that your decisions are being made with full and correct information in the best interests of our children and the VSB as an organization, and for the right reasons. We understand that some information cannot be made publicly available, but everything beyond that should be explicit and public, and this is a habit or skill that should be vigilantly practiced and insisted on. By asking you to demonstrate these critical skills, we are asking you to be leaders. We are looking for you to be fearless and bold as you continue in your roles as elected stewards and advocates for public education in this district. You have the responsibility to provide overall direction and leadership to the district, which includes being constructively part of conversations. So we need you to ask questions. We need you to challenge assumptions. We need you to examine processes, and we need you to promote transparency as part of your role as trustee and in your role as leaders in this district. Obviously, we want you to bring your leadership to bear on the QEA recommendation, which we think should be part of the L Rfp process. And speaking of, the larger project to start bringing your leadership to bear on is the year-long L Rfp consultation. We haven't seen anything resembling leadership from the board on this yet. We suggest starting by examining processes and figuring out where the board needs to begin to assert itself. I will reiterate Deepak's suggestion that you commence by articulating a high-level vision for the district. Do this as a project just of the board, and then bring it forward as the subject of the first round of consultations to see where you've got it right and where you need to iterate to improve it. But make it yours and ultimately set it as the basis for decision-making in the L Rfp and in all future endeavors. If you don't take this course of action, we would expect to see the same results as last year, confusion and compromise. So lead, and let us support you in your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. If you can stay a moment. Any questions to Sean? Jennifer.
Thanks for your presentation, Sean, and for your engagement in these topics. I'm just curious as well, in the process of LRFP as well as the QEA conversation, like how have your consultations with PAC gone? Are you doing the consultation through like surveys to represent some of these groups, or other like methods through DPAC?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. When we came to provide our recommendations or our thoughts on the recommendations in the spring, we did actually send out a survey to PAC and get some input. Going forward in terms of the LRFP right now, we have no direction on what to ask PACs, and we're asking you to provide that as a board.
Jennifer, that's follow-up? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Sean. Thank you for the presentation. Next up, 1.3, Kate Hood, QEA PAC co-chair, and Rebecca Pitfield, QEA PAC co-chair.
Hello?
Very clear, thank you.
So Rebecca and I, and on behalf of the QEA PAC, would like to thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak to you. Queen Elizabeth Annex has been described by the board as a unique circumstance, and we wholeheartedly agree. QEA is a thriving school with a vested and engaged community and a critical provider of French immersion in a city with very limited availability. We have a very large yearly wait list, and our school exists in an area that is developing at a phenomenal speed. It is a school that will be relied upon heavily in the next decade, and the VSB needs to support its growth and preserve the land for future growth of public education in Vancouver. So as we discussed the critical issues of French immersion, enrollment data, and projected growth in the area, and the process by which this decision is being made, we would ask each of you to consider this key question: am I making an informed decision? For those of you who have never been to QEA, let me share with you what has been my personal experience as a parent at the school. My son suffers from high sensitivity and anxiety, which is often exacerbated by social situations. Though I didn't realize it at the time of registration, my choice of Queen Elizabeth Annex, and an Annex in particular, was the perfect place for just such a child to learn. Annexes provide a gradual entry into the school system for highly sensitive, highly emotional, and anxious children. They also provide an environment where children not only know all of their schoolmates by name, they also encourage interaction between all ages and grades. From this, primary age children are able to build self-confidence in themselves and develop empathy towards others. At QEA, my son was fortunate enough to have a forest as his playground. At lunchtime, children would run wild, collect pine cones and berries to use in imagined stores, build forts, and unconsciously learn about the natural environment in which they live. This respect and observance of nature was then carried through into the curriculum by the dedicated teachers at QEA, some of whom have been at the school for over 25 years. At QEA, there is a deeply entrenched garden program. As trustees voted last month to approve the development of a holistic 10-year vision and food framework for the district and create a food working group, I couldn't help but think how an exact program such as this already exists well into at QEA, and it's well into its second decade. Our garden is self-sustaining, and our students are involved in food growing, nutrition, preparation, waste, etc. Not only that, but teachers use the garden as a tool to learn math, art, and science. At the end of his 3rd year at QEA, my son encouraged me to volunteer at the school's annual garden party. What I witnessed was a testament to the power of public education and the fundamental formative experiences it can offer children. It was a culmination of knowledge provided by teachers, parents, local businesses, and organizations such as Fresh Roots and Growing Chefs to help children learn how to produce their own food. It was support from a community of teachers, staff, parents, and administration coming together to facilitate the agency of primary age children to serve a healthy, nutritious meal. But most importantly, it was the pride on the faces of all the kids as they fed a whole school an entire meal of nutritious vegetables that they nurtured, grew, harvested, and prepared from the school garden. To round off my time speaking about the incredible value of QEA to the VSB and public education, I'd like to read a portion of a letter from QEA's sister school, Grandview Elementary. My name is Donna Ma. I am the neighborhood assistant at Grandview Elementary. We are an enhanced service school located off Commercial Drive. We service a large Indigenous, low-income, and single-parent community. I am writing this letter in support of Queen Elizabeth Annex. QEA has been Grandview Elementary's sister school for many years, and it has helped our school in many ways. Many of our families find it difficult to put food on the table, let alone buy clothing for their children. QEA has supported Grandview with winter jackets and shoe donations. They have gifted the school transportation by way of compass cards and cash donations for bus fare. Last year, one of their students took the time to fundraise for our school playground and raised over $1,000. One of the kindest pieces that QEA's PAC does for Grandview is baking and donating cakes, cookies, and cupcakes for our winter celebration. This is one of the highlights of Grandview's event calendar. Queen Elizabeth Annex is a great school that has helped shape young minds in the most positive way. The compassion and knowledge their students show other communities is exceptional. The closure of this school would be a great loss to the community. Please reconsider the closure of Queen Elizabeth Annex. It may be a small school, but the impact is large.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Pitfield. I'm the other co-chair for QEA PAC. I'd like to bring to the board's attention some issues that we had with the staff report regarding the closure of QEA. There are 3 areas of concern, one of which is French immersion. On page 5 of the report, you indicate there will be no reduction to the baseline number of 19 kindergarten cohorts established in 2017-2018. This does fail to provide a factual picture of what has really occurred in the Vancouver French Immersion program in the last few years. The original baseline was 25 kindergarten cohorts a couple of years ago, and even then there was an outcry from citizens across Vancouver that couldn't get their children into French immersion. If you lose the QEA stream, we'll have lost 7 kindergarten streams, and the VSB has in fact only replaced 2 of those. When you set these arbitrary baselines, it doesn't really give us faith that there will be follow through in consolidating, relocating, and adding programs the way it is suggested in the report. There was a quarter of French immersion spots cut over this period, and now this report is being written as though this never happened. If you have your child in school in Vancouver, you have a significantly lower chance of getting your child into French immersion compared to other districts across BC. We have 2 official languages in Canada, and it is the right of all Canadian children to learn French. I do understand that the staff's job is to support the board in making some very hard decisions. I don't believe this has to be done in presenting data that is biased towards a particular outcome, and I think that they can be equally good decisions when given a full picture and accurate data. In this case, the VSB has replaced only 1/3 of the lost classes and shows no plans to replace the rest. Closing another French immersion stream will hinder families struggling with the already massive wait list in the district. So our other issue is wait lists. In the figure 8 on page 10, there's a wait list history presented in the report, and the conclusion states there are minimal wait lists in southwest sector of the district. These are likely first choice numbers, and there are some issues with the way that's established, especially since parents have very particular ways in choosing their programs. You don't pick your first choice, you pick your most likely choice. I mean, we could get into this. I think what we need to talk about are what are the actual application numbers and what is the actual wait list that we see as families at QEA. So in the spring and in February, we had 188 applications to our program. We only take 60 students, and that leaves a wait list of 128 families. There was still an 80 family wait list before the summer. By the time we were looking in September to fill a K spot that opened up, we were still working with a wait list of 30 families. These numbers are similar to those dating back to 2015 when our PAC started collecting this data. Today, so mid-October, in the midst of closure, that the K spot was just filled and we have 7 families on the wait list. This does not include late applicants who are also lining up and aren't on that wait list. We would question the snail's pace at which these spots are filling, but more importantly, how is this data helpful to this board to make a valid decision about the closure of this program? For those of you who don't know the table that I'm talking about, according to the data that's presented in this report, we only had 1 family in the spring on the wait list. And we currently in September had 0 families on the wait list. This is a gross misrepresentation of what is really happening for families in Vancouver. It's also a deeply inaccurate picture of the demand for the QEA and JQ program that is thriving and in high demand. Lastly, I want to talk about the enrollment predictions that do not seem to reflect the massive growth and densification occurring in the area of Vancouver, in this area of Vancouver. UBC has reported that it will double in 10 years. 20% of JQ families come from this evolving area. The massive Jericho lands are looking at an increase of 10,000 people. We have the Squamish lands, Dunbar Corridor with 4-story apartment buildings, rezoning from RS1 to RS2 for duplexes in 99% of single-zoned areas. Who moves into duplexes? Families. You're looking at double the families, double the school-age children. You could have 100 spaces alone just from the Jericho lands. We already see what happened in Olympic Village, and we don't want to see that happening again. The VSB needs to be proactive, and divesting of public education holdings in this area, either through lease or sale, would be an incredibly short-sighted move for this board. You will not be the first board to remind the VSB about the importance of this appreciating asset and keep it in the hands of VSB families in Vancouver. The school has constantly been under threat of school closure since the 70s. The land is a quick fix with short-term gain. We implore you to make prudent and wise decisions about the future of these schools, the land, the community, and all the families and children in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate and Rebecca. I'll open up for questions. Amanda.
Hey, through the chair, how does the PAC feel about the process so far?
Yes, so it is our opinion that the entire process has been rushed and has its priorities all wrong. If you will recall, the 2016 closure listings, the VSB presented a timeline for school closures at their September 15th meeting. The first listing of schools that might be listed for closure occurred in June 2016. The board did not determine a short list of schools until 3 months later in September. Immediately following the approval list, a 2-month community consultation began. So my first question to everyone is this: why this time around is community consultation the last order of business? The board has placed 2 votes to continue the process of closing QEA ahead of any kind of community and public consultation. This is public land. Public consultation should be first and primary concern before any votes are cast. When a consultation occurs once events are put in motion, it leads one to believe that a decision has already been made. My second question is, why was QEA given a weekend's notice that our school was up for closure? The parents at QEA received an email Friday afternoon that our school was once again listed for closure, and the trustees voted to commence the consideration of the recommendation the following Monday. So a Monday, which I might point out was also a professional day, thus many families were out of town. What kind of process is this? Parents were not even given an adequate opportunity to voice their concerns or frustrations at that meeting. Instead, we were given the opportunity to write down questions to be read aloud following the vote. So we are already 1/3 of the way through this approval process, not a decision, by the way. that began less than 3 weeks ago. So how can this be viewed as anything but steamrolling? A cynical person would see this and say, this is a concerted, intentional effort to move this forward as quickly as possible, possibly to avoid negative media coverage, possibly to avoid fair and adequate investigation into the issues at stake, possibly because a decision has already been made. A cynical person would see this and wonder why, when not 5 months ago, this very board of trustees voted not to close schools. And then the first meeting back of the school year, here we are again, another school up for closure. How is this possible? Like, a cynical person would take all of this information and possibly conclude that this is not a consideration or a consultation at all, but in fact, a circumvention of democracy masquerading as due process. What we need is long-term vision. We need a process that has considered all potential shortcomings, disparities in enrollment data, consequences of population boom, loss of valuable public land that can never be regained, impact on students, loss of French immersion cohorts. What we don't need are rapidly changing piecemeal ideas being thrown out as each new issue is raised. By parents, that's not the parents' job, by the way. To make it appear as though there is a plan for something that, in the opinion of many of our parents, has not been thought through, investigated, or approved. Because if, for example, trustees are able to discuss details such as cohorts being added to other schools, or how JQ classrooms will be altered to accommodate 68 new students, there must be some high-level planning that has not been shared with us. Conversely, it would seem negligent of trustees to vote to approve the closure of a school without knowing all these resulting details and to not feel some degree of onus on their electorate to have everything accounted for. So there is either a complete lack of transparency occurring, or we are being fed stopgap notions to keep us from pressing on these critical issues. Both options feel completely disingenuous for a process that is supposed to be fair and forthright. We have serious concerns with the way that information is being presented by the board about QEA, giving a false narrative to the trustees. The process is rushed and inadequate when considering that these are children who we need to ensure are in appropriate learning settings. We need to know that you are basing your decision on true and factual information, that you are taking into account the massive growth that is about to hit this community, the lack of French immersion available in Vancouver to children, but mostly we are concerned that you are thinking about that you need to think about the children that you are uprooting. We want to know that you are taking thoughtful, measured approach, and that we can trust that you have our children and our family's best interest at heart. We want to know that you guys are all making an informed decision.
Rebecca, thank you, Kate. Rebecca, may I ask, because I was writing down information with regards to your original baseline 25, the wait list portion of it, if you can briefly expand on that again, because I see the wait list. Are you including not the first choice, but other choices as
Yes.
well? Okay, I got that then.
Yeah, so the numbers that were in the report, I'm only assuming that they were first choice. Like, there was no source on that figure. There was no information about where the data came from, and there certainly was no dates. So, there's arbitrary spring numbers, arbitrary, I found it very difficult to know where those numbers came from. We're assuming those are first choice numbers, and in which case they don't reflect people that drop off a wait list. They don't reflect people that choose to not go on a wait list once they realize they're not in a school. They don't include numbers to show just the general applications in Vancouver that are often somewhat arbitrary what they pick in terms of first choice, second choice, and third choice. All of our families have come to me saying, look, it's very, very difficult to get into French immersion in Vancouver. It's a strategy. You basically look at school, you take the data, you look at the schools that are that have the most chance of you getting into it. You put that as your first choice. A ton of our families have moved homes. A couple of them have moved a couple times during the days of catchments. So I don't think it's a great reflection on demand at the particular schools. And it's certainly not reflective when you can see that we still have 7 families who, according to the reports from these parents that are on these wait lists, they all want to be in the classroom. They all want to have a spot, even though the school's closing and it's middle of October. I mean, these people are willing to uproot their whole families in kindergarten. I mean, I can't personally imagine that. It's such a stressful time, but if that is how high the demand is right now for this program.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. Right, Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, and I wanted to commend you on your efforts with Grandview. That was amazing. I've done many hours so far of research into reasons about the closure of Queen Elizabeth Annex and the Grandview Elementary component I'd never heard of yet. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. I wanted to ask, where are the kids at Queen Elizabeth Annex going for before and after school care right now? And have you had any discussions with the after school care at JQ about whether they could accommodate the Queen Elizabeth kids and those types of things?
I've been dealing with the childcare issue at Queen Elizabeth Annex for a number of years now. In fact, some of the people here have had me come to their meetings appealing to get a program there. And the problem that we've had is that we were told that we didn't have, the facilities were not up to par in terms of actually the code to have a daycare and or after school care. And however, when we had schools come for their seismic upgrades, their care program would be brought to our school and using the facilities that we were told they couldn't use, which was very frustrating over these years. We had started to get to a place where we were trying to work on getting a program at QEA. So in the meantime, our families have actually come up with their own ways of getting care for their kids. So they collaborate together and find a caregiver. We have Queen Elizabeth main care, and I'm probably getting some of this wrong. There's probably someone here that could speak to it. And Dunbar Kids Club. So we do have some resources, but I can tell you right now that JQ is full, as far as I know. Because yeah, we've tried to have families that, yeah, their care program is full. Yeah, so that's going to be a bit of a problem because we're now going to have our families restructure how they're going to care for their kids at a brand new school.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Rebecca. Next up, Jennifer, and then Janet.
Hi, thanks so much for coming and helping us figure out how to keep the focus on students. I have a question just around the programs that are offered right now at QEA. You mentioned the outdoor program and out of school care. Are there other like in class hours programs that you can share?
Sure, just in like during school hours. We have, I mean,
I would say that our garden program is probably the biggest program that we offer in terms of the in-class stuff. Can you guys think?
We've also in the past had, we've had a tie with some Indigenous leaders in this surrounding neighborhood coming into sew button blankets and weave cedar bracelets with the kids. Susan Point's granddaughter was a student at our school, and she facilitated some art programming and a visit to the Vancouver Art Gallery to see one of her exhibitions a number of years ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you just mean like in general activities, like as PAC, we're constantly organizing all kinds of things. So we have tennis and yoga and dance to play. So we have big performances with the kids to, you know, enhance their movement skills. And apparently they sit much better in school afterwards. That's the reports from the teachers. We've also year after year had the program, and I honestly can't remember the name of it except for my child was in it, where you bring a baby to Roots of Empathy. That's been an ongoing program. And so one of my kids was the test child in that, which was really cool in terms of letting kids learn that kind of like caregiving skill.
Yeah, and my child was also, my youngest was also a Roots of Empathy baby at the school. And to speak to how that plays into the annex environment is that it's, because it's so close-knit, because it is a smaller school, that is something that I think families feel entirely comfortable engaging in. and offers an environment for babies, right? That's more, it's not as busy. It's definitely a little bit, it's a step down, and then it works well.
Janet?
Okay, thank you for coming this evening, and to everyone who's come this evening. You raised a number of questions, and so when we get the staff report, then those questions can be asked of staff.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Rebecca, for your presentation. Next up, we have Jules Quinnell, PAC co-chairs, Nina Lacani, and Katie Howden. Thank you.
Is it on now? Thank you for having us come and speak. We've heard from many parents since we were first told about the plan to close Queen Elizabeth Annex, and we have some deep concerns about the proposal as presented. The enrollment projections for JQ in the staff report show that the JQ capacity is 410 students. Yet your next figure shows that a total planned number of students starting September will be 434. Why is the very starting point to put JQ over capacity? By about an entire classroom. And going forward, the numbers show that it will be over capacity just going forward. And how will this enhance the learning environment for our children? You've provided a chart that shows JQ enrollment as steady, even with the elimination of that third kindergarten class. And I would like to ask how that's possible. Because if it's the case that we lose a kindergarten class, I very strongly disagree with your projected enrollment numbers. How will we stay at the assumed 380 students when we have only 2 kindergarten classes feeding into a school that was designed for 3? Over time, our enrollment will fall at the upper grades, leaving us chronically under-enrolled. So let's assume that our prediction is accurate, and JQ does land at something closer to a 75% capacity in about 5 years with the loss of that third kindergarten class. It then becomes very unclear what the future of JQ is. I ask all of those present here today, what do you do with the school running at 75% capacity? Would you call that an effective utilization of your resources? Schools do not have the same level of resources or engagement when they become chronically under-enrolled. We would begin to lose programs, and we would then be left trying to run a school on 15 to 25% ministry funding, depending on the numbers of where enrollment actually lands over time. Incidentally, we are currently running at about 92% capacity, which I understand is around ideal. We have 378, and that's even a little over the 90% ideal capacity number that I've heard. Why, I would like to ask also, why do you want to either over-enroll us at 435 or 434 when our capacity is 410, or lead us towards under-enrollment over time? And I don't feel like you've answered yet in a detailed way how you will manage running JQ over capacity. How will the space be managed in a way that fosters healthy learning for all children and adheres to the mandated classroom size and composition language? Saying that class size and composition will be guided by the terms of the collective agreement is vague and means little. How exactly, when your plan puts us over capacity, will you maintain this? Your answer also that all students can fit unless Queen Elizabeth Annex families choose to move to other schools does not adequately answer the logistics of how our children will learn in an increasingly crowded space. Your report also mentions reintroducing a third kindergarten cohort back to JQ. I believe this would be imperative for keeping our upper grades full and our school at an optimal capacity utilization. But when would this happen? Where would the mentioned potential addition go? Where are the engineers and builders reports showing how this can be done? And honestly, what would be the priority of a physical addition to a West Side school compared to the needs of all the other schools in the district? The only explicit thing in your report is putting JQ at 2 kindergarten cohorts indefinitely. There is nothing explicit of describing the return of a 3rd cohort, which means that we will lose another French immersion intake across the district. And when your plan includes no actual details, then I don't believe you have a plan at all. That picture is a picture of the classroom, of the computer room, one of the proposed available classrooms. And it has been stated that there are 3 available classrooms at JQ. There is room 108, which is currently not used. There is only this year though, last year it was full. There is a music room, which would be a great loss, but I do believe that it can be shifted to the swing space. The swing space near room 108 across from the stairs. However, the computer room is simply not an adequate space for children to spend the majority of their days. Those are the windows into the hall. Those are the only windows in that room. There's no exterior windows. And even if those windows were enlarged, they would end up being papered over also to minimize distraction from all the activity that goes on in the hallway. The only light would be from fluorescent bulbs. It's a cold room, given that it was designed that way for computers, because it was a purpose-built room, a computer lab, not a classroom. It has no cubbies built in yet, and when they are built, it will eat into the already tight space. If you could forward the, that's another view of the one window wall. If you could forward again, please. This is the room from the front. This wall is shared with the girls' bathroom. So most likely that's where the sink would go. All the classrooms at our school have a sink. I understood that they all had to have sinks. If cubbies are built there, it will eat into the wall. It will eat into the already small space of this room. I measured that room. It is not 75 square meters, which is the mandated minimum size by the Ministries of Education's Area Standards document, section 2.2.4. It is only 73.1 square meters. Now I realize that is fairly close. However, being actually too small on top of everything else, I believe reiterates my message that the space is not acceptable as a full-time classroom. I invite each and every one of you to come to JQ and sit in the computer room, to imagine this being the main place that your own children spend their school hours for 188 days a year. Another issue at our school would be the playground. If you could forward the, oh, that's another, that wall was shared with the gym. So no window could be put in there either. So this is a Google Maps view of JQ from above. It's got Lord Bing and JQ, it's the whole block. The primary K-2 playground at JQ is already very crowded. Parents have long been concerned about children's safety while playing. Children from kindergarten to grade 2 can only play in that front orange section. I cannot see how adding 68 more children to this small space and to these relatively small play structures will work. As a parent, every day I see how much squishing and shoving goes on already, just for kids to maneuver around these structures. The merging of JQ and Queen Elizabeth Annex will introduce increased risk for the children on the playground, and that doesn't make sense. I have spoken with a pediatric occupational therapist, and she has said that those children who need the most movement, those with sensory or movement anxiety issues, those who struggle to sit still in a classroom setting, they will be the worst hurt by an overcrowded playground. They will get less of the movement they need if our small front playground is overcrowded, and they will spend the bulk of their newly shortened recess in lines. They will not get adequate movement to be respectful learners in a classroom setting. All the worse if they happen to be the one jammed into a too small classroom. And here I ask you, why am I the one seeking out specialists? I am no expert. Where has it been shown by experts in the field of child development that this plan is in the best interest of children? Parking at JQ is another issue. The parking around the JQ is, it's squished and it's there's so many people already. And it's been an issue for parents in all of my 7 years at this school. The drop-off zone is small and already crowded and drives through the only painted crosswalk. The surrounding neighbors will definitely not be happy to see an increase in traffic. While JQ and QEA may be fairly close on a map, getting your early primary age kid to walk an additional 9 blocks is not as easy as it sounds. I have issues about the wait list, but I'm running out of time. This decision is sounding mostly economic, but I don't believe this can be a financially motivated decision. These are children, not sardines, not piles of money, real people who will one day run this province. We have to do what is best for them now. Kids are resilient, I know. I have 4 at home and I see that in them every day. But there is a difference between being resilient and being in an inadequate environment for learning. Are we looking to provide quality learning environments in which our children can thrive, or are we merely looking for an adequate place to sit children for a day? I do not believe that this proposal has been well thought out, nor do I believe that an acceptable analysis of the many issues has been done. I am disappointed that I don't see you, the trustees, asking these hard questions. I don't see you demanding our school concerns be addressed before careening towards the closure of a public school. Any decisions you make have to be what's in the best interest for the children, for their learning environment, and for their safety. And I do not believe that the decision to force JQ to operate at 106% capacity indefinitely is in the best interest of children. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina and Katie. I'll open up for questions. Just one, if you can go over, and I think I got it towards the end, but I was a little confused in the beginning with regards to, you're talking about under capacity and the 75%, and you don't want that. Then you go into over capacity, which I know you don't want that. So I sort of, were you working towards something in the middle there, or?
I believe we're at the middle. We are currently at 92%. We're exactly where we should be for what our school can actually do well. We have 378 students, and our capacity per your numbers is 410. So the 75% is what will happen to our school over time with only 2 kindergarten classes coming up. We're a school designed for 3 kindergarten classes to hit starting grade 4. So when that doesn't happen, we will be under enrolled by the number of students of that extra class. So over 5 years or so, we will go down in enrollment.
Okay, I got what you said. Thank you. Okay, Oliver.
Thank you for your presentation. You know, it's funny, even looking at that shaded red up there, it looks like it's a much bigger space than it is. You know, there's a couple of driveways in there and a tennis court that sort of takes up space that our young kids probably wouldn't be using all that much anyways. But just in looking at the configuration, does your school have issues with the number of supervision aides and maintaining watch over all those kids and all those different spots around the swimming pool and the parking lot there?
Absolutely. It's been an issue for a long time. We have 3 supervision aides who work their very hardest. But with the space and with the way it's designed and the back area and the pathway through to the field in the back and the front bit, we need more like 5 just to be able to even maintain the corners to make sure they don't leave the school property. Because they do use the field. The children starting, I believe, grade 4, they all play in the field. The field is full of kids during lunch. The yellow areas are all playground areas. There's a yellow strip right by that black square. The black square is the parking lot, off limits, which also needs a supervision aide to make sure they don't go there anyway. There's a small yellow pathway right by that black square that they can go. But they can't go there till about, I believe it's grade 3 that they're allowed to start going in the yellow. In the grade 2, so the majority of the kids coming from the annex would be in the orange. And it does look fairly big, but it really isn't. The playgrounds are near the bottom rectangle and a little bit into the top rectangle. There's a basketball court that takes up quite a bit of that space, and we do have gardens there as well. And so they do go that area, but it's misleadingly large, actually. It's quite crowded. We do need more supervision aides, yes.
I would like to add something. We actually had people taking their kids out of school because they got bullied or they got hurt because we do not have enough supervision aides. And especially on the little ones, the kindergartens up to grade 3, there's a lot of shoving and everything going on. So there were people, which I know have taken their kids out of school. And PAC actually added an extra playground last year to the back area to kind of give the older kids something to be focused on so that this supervision aides know that they have an area to play with. So the front area, as you said, it's tiny.
Jennifer?
Thank you very much.
Thanks through the chair. Thank you so much for your presentation and for helping us understand the space at JQ. It's really helpful. I'm wondering, you mentioned rooms, well, you mentioned the playground and then you mentioned music room and the computer lab that you had a picture of.
Yep.
Are there other rooms you could tell us about, but also the other presentation mentioned out of school care? If you could also just expand on that from your perspective.
Sure. We also have a multi-purpose room / lunchroom. So in the daytime, it's used as a lunchroom in the middle of the day. Before and after school, we have the Y there. I think they go from 8 till 6 or something. So that's a big space down at the bottom. There's room 108 is also down the bottom, and it's empty fresh this year because with the new classroom composition, we've gone from 17 to 16 divisions. There's a small swing space type room. It's an odd room. It's definitely not big enough for a classroom. It's got all glass on the front. There's a door, but it's all glass, so it's all, you see right into it. The principal would be willing to turn that into the music room if we do have to lose the music room to a classroom. Those are the main sort of available spaces because we're an old school. We don't have the new the flex spaces and the hubs that the new schools have. We have the old stuff. We have one computer room that could be used for all sorts of things, but I don't think a classroom. The music room is also used all the time by our choir and our musical theater program. It's also, I believe, used by the Y on and off. I'm not 100% sure. And same with the flex space that could turn into the music room. The Y, I believe, uses those. I'm not 100% sure of how that's landed this year because it does seem to change year over year.
Sorry, through the chair, just to follow up around the out of school care, because the last presentation mentioned it. If you could just explain the situation for that.
Okay, it is full, chock-a-block, has been forever. It's a long wait list. I don't see any of the Annex kids getting into that unless they've been on that list for 2 years or more.
Barb?
Thank you, Chair. Is there any underground covered play areas?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, 1.5, Kylie Taylor, President of Bayview Community Preschool Board. And we have a overview of your presentation here as well, so thank you.
I'd like to thank the board and the committee for this opportunity to speak to you. Bayview Community Preschool is a strong part of the Bayview school community. It has provided quality, affordable, accessible early childhood education for the last 40 years, with over 60 children currently enrolled in our programs. The preschool is governed by a parent board of directors, and their roles include recruitment, staffing, payroll, budgeting, licensing, fundraising, and applying for grants. The preschool was located at Bayview Elementary until July 2019. Over the summer, the preschool relocated to room 106 at Queen Elizabeth Annex for 2 years due to Bayview Elementary School's seismic upgrade. The VSB made a 2-year arrangement with the preschool to rent this room, and we certainly would not have agreed to relocate to QEA had we known about the proposed closure. I was shocked that there was no mention of Bayview Preschool in the VSB meeting on September 23rd, when it was decided to continue with the process of closing QEA. In further consultations with the VSB, it became apparent that our preschool is viewed as members of the public and not a significant stakeholder in the decision to close the school. This highlights how undervalued early childhood education is as a whole and does not acknowledge our 40-year commitment to the school community. Preschools have a vital role in preparing young children for their transition to kindergarten. Research shows that a child's engagement in a high-quality, play-based early childhood program has positive long-term outcomes on a child's school success. Strong partnerships between preschools and schools are the key to this success. A child's education starts at birth, not when they begin formalised schooling, and preschool plays such an important role in bridging the early education a child receives at home to their school education. Our educators and children have settled into our new classroom at QEA, and we are already developing a sense of belonging to the school community. We have embraced the natural settings, and our children engage in daily nature play sessions in the woods around the school grounds. Our play-based preschool program develops strong foundations for physical, cognitive, emotional and social skills that prepare them for the transition to elementary school. Bayview Preschool also supports, facilitates and manages a unique outdoor nature-based program at Jericho Park. Our outdoor program helps connect children to the natural world and teaches them to be custodians of the land. This connectiveness is essential for the next generation to protect our natural resources, and in a state of climate emergency, these skills are vital. How can humans know how to protect and restore nature if we are not connected to it? We have a long waiting list for this program, but without the support of the preschool, this program will not be able to run. One of the highlights of our program is our annual camping trip to the Sunshine Coast. The preschool fundraises to pay camp fees so that this trip is inclusive for all families. Our dedicated outdoor educator arranges the trip, facilitates nature play and takes the children on nature walks, educating children and their families about the local flora and fauna. For many families, camping is very daunting, especially with babies and toddlers. So our camp trip provides a safe, positive and supportive introduction to camping with children. The long-term benefits of connecting children and their families with nature includes promoting a healthy, active lifestyle, mindfulness, building stronger relationships, creativity and problem solving through nature play, and a deep understanding and respect for our natural world. I will now outline the negative impacts of relocating the preschool for our children, their families and the community. Relocating the preschool is not in the best interest of children, their families, our educators and our community. Young children and their families need stability, familiarity and consistency to learn, develop, feel safe and secure. If the school closes we are forced to move, we will have to relocate 3 years in a row. We have already relocated once and plan to relocate to the new Bayview preschool, new Bayview school in less than 2 years. This displacement alone is less than ideal for our children. An additional relocation would be difficult for everyone concerned. If the preschool is forced to relocate, it may not have the human resources and financial reserves needed to gain a new development application, occupancy permit, license, and keep the preschool running for a second year of initially low enrolments while trying to engage with another new community. The board dedicated countless hours during our seismic upgrade preparations in budgeting, finding a new location, packing, development applications, inspections, arranging special works, occupancy permits, licensing requirements, and setting up the new classroom. The board of directors changes every year, and we cannot guarantee that future members will have the time and skills to facilitate an additional relocation. In preparation for Bayview School's seismic upgrade, the preschool saved money to cover the costs of two relocations and the anticipated initial low enrolments as a direct consequence of the seismic upgrade. Our current enrolments in the preschool are lower than years prior due to our relocation, as some families from the Bayview community did not re-enroll due to the longer commute and the limited public transport options. The board has marketed the preschool in the geographical area around QEA and our enrolments are increasing. However, the instability created by the announcement of the possible closure of QEA has impacted our new enrolments. In order to remain viable, if relocated, the preschool may need to reduce or cut programs, making our highly skilled and dedicated educators redundant. There is currently an early childhood shortage in Vancouver, early childhood educator shortage, in Vancouver, and we may not be able to recruit new educators with the same shared vision, philosophy, skills, and expertise in nature pedagogy. If this were to occur, not only do we risk losing our highly skilled educators, but the social capital that we have invested over the years. To conclude, Bayview Community Preschool wishes to remain on the QEA site until we relocate to the newly built Bayview Elementary School. Relocating the preschool 3 years in a row is not in the best interest of the children, their families, our educators, and our community. Forcing the preschool to relocate could result in programs being cut, our educators being made redundant, and the preschool closing due to lack of funds and human resources. A closure to the preschool due to continued displacement will be a detriment to the local and school community. I would like to end with some questions and considerations. What are the VSB's plans for the preschool if QEA closes? Will the preschool be able to remain on site while the Francophone students use the school? If the preschool cannot remain on site, where will we be relocated to? Will the VSB support Bayview Community Preschool financially with the costs of a new development application, occupancy permit, licensing requirements, and the costs to run the preschool at the initially low enrolments as a direct consequence of being relocated? Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. These questions are not to be answered right now.
I know.
We're going to be
I was just putting them.
Yes, thank you.
Forward.
And we have it in writing, so thank you. I'm just going to open it up for committee members. Questions directly. Jennifer and then Oliver.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks so much for your work and for telling us a little bit about the preschool. Can you just reflect for a moment on how you were informed about this decision?
I was informed by Mark Cormack, the principal of the Annex, just via a telephone call just before all the community was informed. So that was on the Friday before the meeting on the 23rd of September.
Thank you, Oliver.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. When I'm just trying to understand the timeline. When did the VSB commit to the preschool being in Queen Elizabeth Annex?
They committed. There was initial conversation. We initially wanted to go to Queen Elizabeth with the rest of the school. So there was a lot of negotiations prior to that, trying to see if we could fit. And in the end, there wasn't enough space for us to be with the rest of the school. So it was probably around February, March that there was a lot of conversations, and a commitment was shortly after that, maybe April of last year.
And then you moved in the summer. Was that the timeline?
Yes, we moved in over the summer. And so we only had the announcement after the children had been at school for 2 weeks, and we'd only just finished unpacking the boxes. So it was a real shock, to be honest, because 3 relocations in 3 years is really overwhelming for a board of volunteers to manage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. And I know this is if anyone had known the discussion with regards to QEA at this point, the decision would have been thought of quite differently, probably. So I think the board is, we've been looking and discussing with regards to this specifically, and it is something that the board would be supporting of in any way that we can with regards to the preschool. So that's all we can say at this point, but this will be definitely included in the consultation if we go in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That's it for the delegations. Just wanted to tell everyone that there were a number of questions submitted by these prior to this, the delegations, and also at the last board meeting, there were a number of questions that were submitted. So those were itemized and there was a staff response and that was sent out. It's included in the package, I believe. You have to just click on the appendixes. So what staff could answer at that time is at this point included in the package. So moving straight into 4.2 of the agenda, consideration of closure of Queen Elizabeth Annex. And presenting will be David Green, Secretary Treasurer, and Suzanne Hoffman, Superintendent. And after that delegation presentation, then we'll have a discussion among stakeholder groups.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is a report as item 4.2 in the agenda book. I don't have any plans to go through it in any detail. It's in there, and I hope that it provides information to trustees and stakeholders, but also, you know, as been noted in the delegations, the opportunity to provide some clarity on some of the issues that have been raised. So I did want to show one slide which kind of shows where we are in this process according to policy 14. And as you can see here, it is we're now at the Facilities Planning Committee meeting. If this, you know, whatever happens from here on if it goes back to the board, then the board has an opportunity under the policy to either go into public consultation on the closure consideration or to determine that no further action is required. So this is the chart that's in the as Appendix L in the staff report, but also a updated version of the one that was included in the September 23rd board meeting. So, Mr. Chair, I'm leaving it over to you to ask stakeholders and trustees if they have questions, concerns. We have staff here that, you know, depending on the nature of the question, we may want to, I may want to consult with staff to provide answers. So over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. So we can open it up for questions and comments directly to staff. Keep in mind, I will probably focus this towards the end of this agenda item, that there is the recommendation to be going to the board, and it will be discussed at the board. The Facilities Planning Committee report on consideration of the closure of Queenie Annex be referred back to the Board of Education meeting on October 28, 2019 to determine that either, and this will be determined at the board, if no further action or study is required, or to initiate a public consultation process on the proposed closure. But before we get into that specific question, I'll just open up for general questions, comments with regards to the report. Carmen.
Thank you through the chair. When considering this proposal, there were many factors to consider, and one of the main ones for me was, is this best for our students? So is this best for students in terms of outcomes, student well-being, and opportunity? So first, I'd like to say that we value French immersion and we appreciate that it is a highly sought-after program in Vancouver, and I don't see that 3 kindergarten classes could be accommodated at Jules Quinnell. The outdoor space at Jules Quinnell is a challenge because of the layout, and I believe adding supervision aides could help, but even with that, adding additional students would create, I think, a somewhat unsafe environment just in terms of the sight lines and the way that it is spread out. QEA land is unique and very valuable, and I do wonder if in this proposal we are getting enough for the land.
If we chose to close QEA, we would be assisting the Minister of Education, which, while it is good to work together and come to compromises, we, the Vancouver School Board, have significant issues of our own, and we need those issues to be addressed. So I do feel that we should be asking for assistance with some of the issues we have in the school board if we were to support this, such as the expansion of Edith Cavell or a school at Olympic Village. So for these reasons, and I have done a lot of I've thought about this, read the report, visited JQ, spoke with parents, I don't feel that this recommendation should proceed to the board.
Thank you. Next up. Janet?
So, a number of questions are raised by the delegations this evening. I think maybe starting with the last one, what is the questions around the Bayview preschool and the potential for the preschool to move for 3 times in 3 years? Could we ask staff if they could stay on site if the CSF were to take the site? What are the plans if that's not possible, and about the possible financial support for the preschool?
Through the chair to Trustee Fraser. The first question is, can the CSF accommodate the childcare? Well, that conversation hasn't happened. There's been no discussion of that with the CSF because that would, be presupposing an outcome that is not happening yet. So, but I have spoken with Kylie Taylor, and we have identified, we're in the process of identifying an alternate space in another school that is licensable by the licensing authority for childcare. And I've also indicated to her, given the obviously financial impact that the moves have had on her program, that if we did move them to another site, then I think there's an obligation on the part of the board to be responsible for, some of the financial costs that that she will incur for that program. So I've had those conversations, but we haven't come to any final conclusion.
Jennifer, and then Oliver and Barb. Joanne. Sure, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to reiterate that some of the questions that both the PAC from QEA as well as the PAC from JQ brought forward, those were similar questions that teachers had brought forward as well. And I know that we went out along with staff from the VSB to talk initially and have conversations at the school. And we've been continuing to have that dialogue with teachers. Because they have concerns around the breakout spaces and what would happen to the garden and certain things like that should this move forward. One of the pieces in the report, just around a question if somebody could elaborate on and expand on, is just the piece about the Partnerships BC and just what that assessment process looked like and what it entailed, because the report doesn't really go into that in detail.
Again, to the chair, to Joanne, the Partnerships BC report is actually the property of the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education engaged Partnerships BC to do the analysis, and I've been working with the ministry to obviously see if we can get that report released, because it's obviously of interest to people to see what the evaluation criteria were in that report. And I've been told by the ministry that, I've been working with them to have that report released in some form. And I think we're at a place where they may, they're just checking to see if there's any redactions need to be made in it. But the ministry people that I've spoken to don't think there needs to be any redactions. And I suspect that what will happen is they'll probably post it on their website at some point in time. And when that happens, the community will be informed.
That's okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move it to Jennifer, Oliver, then Barb.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I just have a couple questions. I'll start with one. Why the QEA proposal isn't a part of the long-range facilities plan process?
I think I can answer that one. It's the long-range facilities plan occurred, and we update that every year, but this is coming from the ministry and Partnerships BC. Anything to add to that?
Yes, I can add to that, Trustee Wong. It is related to the long-range facilities plans, particularly with respect to the capital asset management component of the long-range facilities plan. And as stated in the report, an opportunity to generate capital revenue. So there is a connection to the long-range facilities plan with respect to this opportunity to, look at the potential closure of the school, to, as the report says, to enter into possibly a long-term lease with the CSF.
Thanks, through the chair. So with that, I know we made other decisions in the long-range facilities plan, so there's just some confusion around whether the capital asset management plan supersedes the other decisions made in the plan, like removing school closures from that list as well. And just picking up on some of the questions raised by the first presenter from DPAC around why QEA's consideration of closure wouldn't have been considered as a part of LRFP, which the board voted on in April to remove school closures from the consideration of LRFP.
Through the chair to Trustee Reddy, the decision to look at the consideration for the closure of QE Annex was made after the board adopted the long-range facilities plan. But as stated in the report, and as I said a few minutes ago, that it is related to the long-range facilities plan component that's called the capital asset management plan, which was recommendation number 4 of the plan, of the long-range facility plan that was adopted by the board.
Maybe I could add to that answer. I think maybe what Trustee Reddy is referring to is the recommendation, I think it was recommendation 12 in the LRFP, that the board asks staff to bring forward a list of schools for closure. And that recommendation was not approved by the board. So within the LRFP process, the board did not ask staff to come forward with a list of schools for closure. However, in the closure policy, there is always the option for staff to bring forward a recommendation to the board. So in the LRFP, there was not a decision not to close any schools. There was a decision not to ask staff to bring schools forward for closure. So it's a little bit of the wording is a little nuanced.
I would agree with that. Jennifer, yes, follow up.
Thank you, through the chair, for the explanation. I think that's part of the confusion then that we've heard.
Thank you. Oliver, then Barb, then Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, but what I'll do is I'll just break them up and maybe speak a little later once a few other people have gone. But starting sort of with the high level of the French Immersion program, if we look at this discussion about a baseline number of 19K cohorts, so it was established in 2017, 2018. I just want to understand how that was established, and if it was in fact 25 or something more than that, why it was reduced at that time.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to refer to staff for a second to get an answer to that question.
Okay, take your time. So after Oliver, I have Barb, Amanda. Was there anyone else on this list? Harjit?
So Deputy Superintendent David Nelson will answer that question.
Yeah, through the chair. So 25 classes was reflective of the fact that at the time we were able to do K1 combined groupings. With the restored classes composition language coming into effect, the district is not able to combine kindergarten and grade 1 students anymore. That did result in an overall headcount decrease of the number of students being in that we're able to intake into French immersion. Since that time, the district has been looking and working, and as is noted in the report, adding classes. In particular, for this year, 2 K classes were added in the district, moving us up to 21. We also, as a district, have been actively intaking students at the grade 1 level to keep our French immersion numbers up. So the number of 19 is a reflection of the change in language to having K only, and that being the level at which, as a district, we have committed to maintaining, and in fact, have also committed to seeing that number exceeded, as we currently have 21 K intake or K French immersion classes this year.
Thank you. If I could just follow up on that and then, so this baseline number that was established, was that a board decision or was that a decision of staff?
Yeah, so again, through the chair, that was a decision made at the staff level, looking at a number of variables, including space availability, as well as the ability to staff the classes. Over the last couple of years, we've been actively recruiting qualified French immersion teachers, but that has further compounded some of the challenges in the district with increasing and growing the program, the lack of qualified teachers.
Another question?
Hi. Yes.
Or did you want to come back?
I just wanted to say thank you for that, and just sort of dovetails on that. Have we had any discussions with the teachers at Queen Elizabeth Annex? Is there any chance that we're going to lose any of those French teachers because of this move, or do we have some consensus with the union or the teachers that they will move over?
Through the chair, I don't believe, I'll check with staff, but I don't believe we've had, that level of conversation with any of the staff. I know that we had district staff go out and meet with the teachers and, the staff, not just the teachers, but all the staff of the schools. And, there was a series of questions that were asked, and those are included in one of the appendices to the report. But I'll just check with staff.
Yeah, so again, through you, Chair, as Secretary Treasurer Green has noted, our 2 district principals did go out to the school, as well as 2 members of VESTA executive, and Joanne may want to add to this, to address teachers' questions and concerns at Queenie Annex should the closure proceed. The teachers do have continuing contracts in the district and would be accommodated at other programs, and as I noted, we have a shortage of French teachers, so we certainly would have work for them in the district. I'm not sure if Joanne wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Joanne.
Sure. So through the chair, so there's provisions in the collective agreement. So should there not be a position at that school anymore, that the teachers would be declared surplus, and so then they would go through the post and fill process. And so on the one hand, you would have teachers being surplus from one site, and then you would have postings that would be generated and positions be generated at a new site, but there's no necessary guarantee that those teachers would automatically go. They would have to follow the post and fill. So should they choose to do that and that process be followed, that might be where they land, or they could choose to post into anywhere throughout the district.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I'll have the rest of my questions once other people have spoken.
Great, thank you, Oliver. Barb?
Thank you, Chair. I think one of my questions has been answered, but just to confirm, on page 3 of the report, it says the enrollment at LJQ declined due to the implementation of restored class language in 2017 to the current level. So that was because of the K1 split that's not allowed is why the enrollment went down, not because of space.
Through the chair, it was also related to, the class size, the new class sizes that came in with the restored language, not just the K1 split issue.
Okay, there's where I'm obviously not understanding it. You have the same number of students, you just can't put the same number in classrooms. I don't understand why the enrollment would go down. So in other words, what we did was we said there are only this number of classrooms and that can accommodate this number of students. And so some students had to go elsewhere because we didn't have enough classrooms for them.
That's how I read it as well, but I'll wait for staff to.
Yeah, so through the chair, there were no students displaced. It is it is a bit complex, sorry, can't speak. So there is always a cohort of students leaving the school, grade 7s. So that cohort, as it goes out, you're not necessarily able to intake the same number of students coming in, particularly with the class size language. So it was a combination of a reduced K intake, the change of class size composition language, and then the grade 7 cohort leaving the school.
Thank you. So again, I'm just want to try and get this. I thought I was good at math, but my eyes are just going, whoa. So let me understand this. Because the class size language that was restored said you could only have this number of students in a classroom, and the board, so say there was 68 kindergartens coming in, and 70 grade 7s left. So that's a difference of 2. Say there are 68 kindergartens coming in. So the limit is 20 or 18, 20? 20, yeah. So 20, 40, 60, that would be 3 kindergarten classes with 8 left over. Now, instead of accommodating those 8 at the school, something else happened with those 8 students.
Sorry, Trustee Parrott, I'm not sure I totally understand. So we were able to take in 22 kindergarten students previously. Often we could do a K1 combined grouping. So that might mean, to your point, you could take, and again, I don't have the specific grade breakdown, but you might have taken in at some point like 60 kindergartens to a French class because you'd have maybe 2 Ks in a K1. Don't know if that's the case in this one. But with the restored language, we could no longer do a K1. And we also had to reduce by 2 the number of students into a K class. So we wouldn't have taken in those students to start with. And then the grade 7s leave on the other end. So you're just not fully replacing. So that reduced the class overall. So no students were moved out of the school. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because I'm forgetting that it's kindergarten and they're not in the school until they get into the school. So the enrollment went down because the school couldn't accommodate the numbers. Okay. Has the school board sought, and maybe you don't want to touch this at all, but has the school board sought a memorandum of a mid-contract modification to deal with the restored language from decades ago, to enable K1 splits?
Through the chair to Trustee Parrott, we have not done that. I would ask Associate Superintendent Carmen Batista to maybe make a comment on that.
Thank you. There's no longer a process for mid-contract modifications that they get approval from BCPC and the BCTF. No interest from BCPC, BCTF, both. Okay. My last question, thank you very much. My last question is on page 4. It said staff have determined that LJQ can be organized into 19 classroom divisions. By staff, do we mean district staff or do we mean the staff at Jules Quinnell?
The reference in the report refers to district staff.
Amanda.
Hi, so through the chair, I have a number of questions. Do you want me to go through all of them or one by one?
One by one.
Okay, so we'll start off with my first one. I have yet to see where you've made a motion to pass the long-range facility plan last year. It wasn't in the May meeting minutes or the June. You just passed a number of recommendations, and yet I keep seeing it referred to as that it was passed.
The recommendations made, and we had the discussion amongst staff as well. The recommendations that were passed are part of the long-range facilities plan, so that encompassed the whole thing. So that's how we considered it as part of the long-range facilities plan, made up of the recommendations that were passed.
That might not be how others have viewed it. Okay. Next question, why wasn't the disposal of a school property part of the long-range facility plan 2019 when the board working plan for 2018-19 said that it would be included? And this working plan was passed after the ministry engaged Partnership BC.
Mr. Chair, I would want to check the report on that. I don't recall. I don't have the working plan with me, so I would want to check the dates on that.
On May 9th of 2018 at Committee 1 Management Coordinating Committee meeting, that working plan was presented, which included that as part of what would be in the following long-range facility plan.
And what is the reference in the report?
The disposable of a school property for the CSF was referred to as being required into the next long-range facility plan.
Could you send that to Secretary Treasurer and myself? We'll look into that.
Yeah, I've got the exact wording was update the long-range plan and informs a decision to dispose of a school site for use by the CSF was the wording that was in there. My next question is through the chair. Why is now the time for this discussion? What occurred since the partnership report came out that has made this an urgent issue that shouldn't wait for the long-range facility plan process to determine if QEA has a place in VSB's long-term plans?
I think, Mr. Chair, could you just repeat that question, please, again? Sorry.
Why are we discussing this now? What occurred since the partnership report came out that has made this an urgent issue that can't wait for the long-range facility plan process to determine if Queen Elizabeth Annex has a place in VSB's long-term plans?
I think in the long-range facilities plan, there were a number of areas where we were going to look at areas, and then that was one of the areas. Also in the long-range facilities plan, there were a number of recommendations were passed, including the one as the Secretary Treasurer stated with regards to capital asset management. Couple that with the presentation or the Partnership BC's I think directions towards the board to look at specifically Queen Elizabeth Annex is where we are at today's date. And where we are at is come the next board meeting, the trustees will decide on whether we're moving forward or just ending this altogether.
Yeah, so follow up for that. One of the staff's responses to why close QEA, and it was to be able to enter into negotiation with the CSF for a long-term lease of the site. So it seems financial more than looking at educational.
Which is part of the capital asset management plan.
I have two other ones more based for the trustees. What are the trustees' decision-making priorities when it comes to looking at QEA?
That's for each individual trustee to be discussing.
And my final is, how does the French immersion motion weigh in the rationale? It's mentioned several times in this report, but do the trustees see the loss of a K as an acceptable version of consolidation?
That's part of the consultation process. I won't answer that at this point. There is written in the report that the baseline of 19, and then there is, and this is part of the questions during the consultation process, or even tonight, with regards to how to expand that, including a third French immersion class at Jules Quinnell, amongst other things. So that is part of the process.
Thank you. That's what I have for right now.
Harjit?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Just want to make a couple of comments. Actually, first of all is operating engineers. We always said that in the past too, we're not in favor of closing neighborhood schools, because when you close neighborhood schools for short-term gain, this is not for the best interest of the students, staff, and the community where the school is located. And also, if we are going, what we are discussing is closing a school to get funding to build another school. So I'm not sure if this is a good example setting, because we have just done one couple of years ago when we sold part of school land to BC Hydro to get a school built. Now, if ministry wanting us to close another school to build another school, so it is up to the ministry to fund schools in in the neighborhoods, and also for the French school, the Supreme Court case, which was, I believe, in 2015 or 16. So that ordered ministry to find a site for CSF. So there is no ministerial order from the, which I understand, there is no ministerial order from the ministry to VSP that we have to close the school. We are just going, we are doing it just to get the capital funding for from that land to use somewhere else. So I will definitely urge trustees to not go through that route and not set a pattern that will be continuously, in the past, ministry has told us over and over that a lot of our schools are underutilized. And so if it's this school this time, it'll be another school next time. And second, so I have one question which was asked by Trustee Reddy earlier, because our understanding when we were going through the long-range facilities plan, when we took that recommendation 12 off, or trustees voted no, understanding was we are not going to close schools. So even whatever the language said, but the understanding at the table, I understood that we are not going through the school closure process for this long-range facilities plan. So it's kind of coming right back into the school year. We are talking school closure. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Harjit. Any next person? Oliver? Jennifer, Janet, and then Oliver.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, one of my questions was if the CSF is aware that they're getting an H3 seismically graded school. Is that something they want?
Through the chair to Trustee Reddy, the CSF is aware of the condition of the school.
Yes.
Yeah, so with that, if we're leasing out space, I know we chatted about this at a different meeting. The VSB being the landlord would still be responsible for upgrades to the space, like boilers and any kind of upgrading that's needed, even in a lease situation?
Through the chair to Trustee Reddy, that would be, those would be terms that we worked out in the long-term lease. So we haven't, we're nowhere near that conversation.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, I think there's some bits of information for me, like learning about the preschool piece today, out of school care, play space, the potential of adding space, but not knowing exactly what those details are. And then the confusion around the long range facilities plan process and how it plays in and doesn't play in at the same time leaves me with a gap in information on this proposal.
Janet, thanks, Janet.
So, thank you. Maybe I can address some of the points raised by Harjit. I think the BC Hydro proposal was quite different from this proposal. The BC Hydro proposal was, as it came to the board, was directly tied to that community in the West End. So the impact on the Roberts Annex site, the building the school at Cole Harbour and the replacement school at Roberts Annex. And part of the decision process of the board was speaking with the ministry about when a new school downtown would be funded. And the response was it would not be within a 10-year horizon. So my understanding from reading this report is that if the board were to move forward with this, and if the board were to negotiate a long-term lease with the CSF, that would be income that would come to the VSB. It would be our local capital money, and the ministry would have no have no authority to tell us how to spend that money. And that money would not, and in our discussions with the ministry and with the board, we have been very clear that if the VSB has capital funds, and we do have, about $1 million at the moment, that we will not be putting that funding into anything that the ministry should be funding. We will not be putting that into what the ministry should fund for a seismic program, which is the lowest cost option. We have a choice to expand on the lowest cost option. And that's the case where, Cavell came and presented on either having a replacement school or expansion school, and we were not able to do that. We're clear that we would not be paying for new schools if that's the responsibility of the ministry, unless we were to, in the case of BC Hydro, decide it was a real priority for us. But, Olympic Village is our top of the list commitment. It's been on our capital plan request since 2006. So I think we have a strong position in the district around that. So I think the clarity around how the money would come in and how we would spend it is not yet there. I do have a question for staff around the French immersion cohort size of kindergartens, and the understanding that it's been set at 19 in the past, and it seems as though one of the primary limits on the program is having the staffing capacity to sustainably run the program. I'm assuming that if the board would want to make a commitment to, say, having 19, 20, 21, and I don't know if we have the staffing capacity to go beyond 21, then that is something we could do as a board, and we could give that direction to our staff, that is what we want to do. So I think my question for staff is, and I don't know if we have the answer this evening, where are we in the staffing capacity within the district to commit to kindergarten cohorts? It sounds as though we're very comfortable with 19. What is there an upper limit to that comfort at this time?
Can we even make that commitment?
Through the chair, thank you. So currently we do not have confidence that we can expand the program to meet the demand because we are still not in a position where we feel comfortable with meeting the demand of qualified teachers. We have, as many of us know, gone to extraordinary means to recruit across the country and elsewhere. Given that we have this year qualified French immersion teachers in all of our classes, but at this point we're not looking to expand until we have a more confidence that we have enough staff. Beyond the 19 to 21, which is where we are this year. Next year it could be 20. So from year to year, it will change based on spaces in schools and available staffing. So we're not committing to the same number every single year for X number of years.
Thank you. Oliver.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. How many applications did Queen Elizabeth Annex receive for the French immersion program this year as their first choice?
Through the chair, this year there was 82 first choice for the combined JQ and Queen Elizabeth Annex. Families applying for their children for that area because there's a combined catchment. So there's 3 divisions, 60 students, and there were 82 who applied as first choice for one of those 2.
Thank you. And how many children across the district who wanted French immersion as their first priority ended up not getting into the program at all at the kindergarten level?
Thank you. Through the chair, currently we have 200 students on the wait list who did not get in. We had about 75 students who were offered spaces and said no between February and as late as yesterday, because we continue to offer spaces as new spaces come up through movement. Families continue to move across the district, etc.
Thank you. And if we eliminate a classroom, a kindergarten classroom, has there been thought put into what we're going to do with that teacher? Seeing as we're so desperate, there obviously is going to be one French teacher without a class, or is there a plan in place for that?
So as our colleague Joanne explained earlier, there is a collective agreement with outlines the steps for posting and filling. So if a teacher were to become surplus, they could then apply through the posting process to secure employment in another school. We also have, as part of the French immersion review, the idea of looking to expand late French immersion in the future too, as our confidence builds in having enough staff.
Thank you. Just so I understand that. So we've got 4 French immersion teachers right now at Queen Elizabeth, and there'll be 3 classrooms, and so they would apply as surplus for those 3 opportunities, or however it is over at JQ. But won't there be necessarily one teacher short just based on the math?
So not necessarily, through the chair, not necessarily, because every year we do have retirements, and we have 200 French immersion teachers currently in the district, about 200. So we did hire 24 new teachers in this last year. So teachers do come to the district and leave the district for different opportunities and for different reasons. So we are confident that we have available positions for many more than the 4 teachers should they become surplus at Queen Elizabeth Annex.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Now, in the answers to some of the questions here, particularly into the QEA staff, we were talking about this 3rd classroom, and it said a 3rd kindergarten classroom would be possible with an addition to LJQ. Is that a reference to a building extension or a portable classroom?
It's a reference to an addition. Hasn't been discussed in terms of what exactly it would look like. We do recognize that to put a portable on that site would be difficult. So we're probably leaning towards an addition to the building if we were to go down that road. We've done some preliminary work on getting some high-level costing, what that might look like.
Thank you. And do you have some feedback as to what that costing might look like?
Not at this time.
And from a process point of view, would that require a board decision to spend that money, or is that like in the budget, or is that something that's decided at the staff level?
That would be something we would take to the board.
Thank you. I have a few more questions. I don't want to take up any more time if other people want to ask a few more things.
Sure, I'll ask. Anybody? Barb?
I think mine's fairly simple. The 21 French or K French immersion includes 3 at Queen Elizabeth Annex. Am I correct?
Through the chair, correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question to staff with regards to QEA. I know it's not on the current 5-year capital plan. Any thoughts of where it would be sitting for a seismic upgrade if we were going through the normal process?
QEA is not high on the list for seismic upgrading. It hasn't been put into our 5-year capital plan.
Janet?
Sorry, just to come back to Trustee Parrott's question, were you asking if there were 3 kindergarten cohorts at QEA?
No, it's 3.
I think there's 3 classes. Sorry, maybe we could get clarity on that.
So there is 1 K class at QE Annex. And there are 4 divisions in total.
Thank you. I was talking about not just the K classes, moving the whole school to, what I wanted to know was all of the classes are at QEA are accounted for in the 21 number. And my understanding of the answer was yes. I mean, it was, so we can accommodate 21 because we already have the staff for it, because we have it now.
Janet?
Sorry, I think those are 2 different questions. The 21 is the number of potential kindergarten cohorts across the whole district. And there are 4 divisions at QEA, of which 3 would move to JQ. So the 21 and the 3 aren't directly related.
Chair, through what it means is that if only 3 classes of the 4 are sent to Jules Quinnell, we are reducing the number of French immersion cohorts in the district by 1, unless we decide to put another cohort somewhere else, as we did when we closed Hudson. There was it didn't account for a reduction in the French immersion classes because we put 2 new ones, one at Hastings and one somewhere else, and I can't remember. So in this case, by only moving 3 to Jules Quinnell, we would be reducing the number of French immersion classes by 1.
So through the chair, it's a little bit more complicated than that because it's a head count issue. So right now, for example, in our West Side French immersion programs, so not just the JQ and QE Annex, there are approximately 100 spaces because of classes not being fully maximized. So when you move the classes over, you're not, to your point, you're not necessarily keeping the same 4 divisions, but you're not reducing the overall student numbers because you would organize the QE and the JQ students together within the 19 divisions. So there would be efficiencies in organization, which wouldn't necessarily, doesn't mean a reduction in overall student spaces. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It would be nice to have those specific figures if we could get them. Thank you.
Back to Oliver.
Thank you. So I understand then without having this 3rd K classroom, as I understand it, we have concerns about maintaining enrollment in the upper years of this program at JQ. Is that a fair statement?
So through the chair, most of our programs that are very vibrant have 2 classes. And so what we've done to balance the numbers is we do a larger intake at grade 1 for those programs. So the vast majority of our larger programs have 2 K classes. So we believe we would be able to balance enrollment needs by a larger grade 1 intake.
Thank you. I'm just looking for clarification on 2 things in some of the questions and answers that were given in Appendix J. The first is about sibling priority. And there's a reference here that the students would have continuing status. But what about for next year? The students haven't actually got to JQ. Would their siblings who would have had priority at QEA have priority as of September 2020 if the board decided to close the school?
Yeah, through the chair, yes.
And then just a second commitment was that when we've heard tonight from the JQ PAC about the supervision on the playground there, can we get a commitment, or is there some discussion or going to be a report on how many supervision aides are going to be at this school if we add 68 additional children?
Yeah, so through the chair, we could definitely look at and provide more information back as to the needs of the school around supervision. And sorry, can I just go back, Trustee Hansen, to your other question just quickly? Because one of the things I forgot to mention is that what happens in most of our sites as well is that we do alternate between a 2K intake and a 3K intake. So we're very well aware that what is likely to happen, or one possibility is for JQ would be 1 year you would do 2Ks, and then because of the way the school organizes, you'd have a classroom space to allow you to do 3Ks the following year. So we have examples such as like with La Kobilang, where we have alternated between a 2 and a 3K intake, and that also helps us to keep the numbers robust.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I just have a question about process. We've talked a lot about the school closure, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Policy 20 and the disposal of lands. When does that process kick in all of this?
Through the chair to Trustee Hansen, the policy would require that, first of all, that the board would have to have a closed school, or school closed, and that then you could then initiate start the disposal process. And it's, the board would have to pass a motion to do that. But you actually have to, have a school that you want to dispose of in order to invoke Policy 20.
So just on that thought, so the process is that, theoretically the board would decide to close the school first, and then it would kick into Policy 20. Is that the right order?
That it would be the right order.
And so in that order, is there a concern? Is there a concern that once a commitment like that would have been made by the board, that it would sort of be what I might call a distress sale, because whoever CSF knows that we've closed the school, we got to do something with it, and now our sort of negotiating bargaining power is a lot less than it would have been, say, before that decision. Is that, I don't know, have we gone through that process before, and how has that worked out?
I'm not aware that we've gone through that process before.
And one last question. I was just looking at Policy 20, and it talks about a requirement to initiate a public request for proposal or tender process, unless the disposition was to a not-for-profit or public authority. Is CSF one of those?
CSF is another public school district, so the Policy 20 would not apply to going to RFP for public, putting the property on the market.
And that's because it's deemed a public authority? Is that how I'm reading it?
Yes, exactly. It's a public authority. It's, yeah, it's a public school, so.
It's a corporation under the School Act, is that?
Yeah, it's school district number 93. Like we're school district number 39. So it's a public school district in the province.
And so we wouldn't have to do an RFP process. So then our only negotiating partner would be CSF if we were to consider doing anything with these lands after a closure. That's what I'm understanding.
The report that's in the agenda book is quite clear. You know, if the board considers the closure of QE Annex, then it's quite clear in the report that we would enter into negotiations for a long-term lease with the CSF.
And were you able to provide an update of where that negotiation's at today?
There have been no negotiations at this point.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a clarifying question, have the plans for the CSF on the Heatherlands changed? Or are those still in place as a part of this process?
As explained in the report to the chair, to Trustee Reddy, you know, conversations that, you know, we've had with senior staff at the CSF indicates that they would like to have 2 schools on the west side of Main Street in Vancouver. And so the Heatherlands is still a property that they would be interested in, I'm pretty sure.
Thanks so much for the clarification. So this space would be in addition to the Heatherland space?
That is correct.
There is also something in the report that says if they get the Heatherlands and the QEA, that there's possibility of not renewing the Livingston Annex. Laurier Annex.
Laurier Annex.
Yeah. So, don't know though. Anybody else? Oh, Janet?
There has been some speculation that the school, if the QEA site were to close, and you know it ties into Trustee Hansen's point about would it go straight to working with the CSF, and it seems to me that that's the answer. But there's also been some speculation that a private school or an independent school would be interested in using these lands. And my recollection is that as a board, a previous board passed a motion around not leasing any school sites to private or independent schools where there was not if they were not already an existing tenant. I don't see that in our policy, but I think it might be helpful for that information to come forward to trustees. And more of an actual question of staff, there has been discussion around what the waste lists look like, and that the information presented in the report is around the first choice wait list. And then some numbers have been shared today about the full wait list for the French immersion program. So I think it would be helpful for trustees to get more detailed information about the wait list and the wait list at different schools, and how that is. I know we have a lot of demand for French immersion programs, and I know that the board values them, and I think some more detailed information would help trustees in considering, you know, I think that would help trustees, as it's one of the factors that we should be considering.
Were there anything specific you want in the expansion? The report comes with things on the west side, first choices. Are you looking for the whole district or second choices and things like that?
I think getting more details beyond just the first choice requests, and what you know, if there's a wait list that at the 2 schools that is includes students who weren't the first choice, because I think that would give a more more information about the situation at these particular schools.
Thank you. Deputy Superintendent?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, we certainly can provide that information. I can't give you a breakdown of every school, but I can tell you for the combined catchment of JQ and QE Annex. As was noted, there were 188 first, second, and third choice applicants. At the moment, all but 3 of them have been offered a placement in a program. 67 of them declined placement. A number of them took other placements. So of the first, second, and third choice 188 applicants to QE Annex, there would be a total of 3 still on a wait list, none of them being first choice applicants.
Okay. I'll have one more question and we'll wrap up this session. And okay, Jana, go first.
Okay, so there was the DPAC delegation talked about the binary nature of the decision points. My understanding is that the board, we work under Robert's rules. We always have the option to defer or we have the option to postpone. I'm just looking at the Secretary Treasurer to see if that's correct.
That would be correct, Madam Chair.
And I'm also hearing from trustees that there is a concern about not having enough information to make a decision based on, or not having sufficient information to make a decision on this. So, again, that could be a discussion we would have at the board table about whether we are in fully, trustees do have to be fully informed to make a decision. Are we in that position with the information presented here, with the information from the delegations, with the information that's coming forward and that we can request in the weeks before the board meeting?
Possibility of a third option you're saying here with regards to deferring or postponing. Okay. And that's, this came from the board to committee, so it goes back to the board for that discussion of the direction of that, however it's to go, not for the committee tonight. My question is, and I don't think staff can really present an answer, but more of their thoughts of how the province would react or the ministry reacts with regards to, has there been any precedent setting from other districts where other districts capital is only announced from the province through the 5-year capital plan? Just thinking, and this was a number of questions that came to the board to tie in an area, a school, because at the last committee meeting, there was another school that came out, the Fraserlands, the Olympic Village, about their needing of space. So is there tying of lands of, if there's a closure for one area to open another area? Has any other district had that discussion with the ministry? Or everything comes through the 5-year capital plan with regards to a new school or an expansion of a school? There's no way we can get a commitment from the province with regards to if one school closes, another school, they'll fund a new school or an expansion of a school in any other district.
I'm not quite sure, Trustee Wong, if I'm following your thinking, but everything the ministry approves in the capital plan should be, should go through the 5-year capital plan process. There are probably situations that have happened where I can speak to one in one of my former districts where the district sold land to contribute to a capital project, but it still got approved through the 5-year capital plan process.
Right.
So I don't think I'm not aware of anything where you're sort of trading off one against the other. I'm not aware of that.
Right, okay. Janet?
I did put some thought to the funding that we've received in Vancouver and whether it's all been through the 5-year capital plan. And my recollection is that everything has been except for the recent announcement about Hamber, where the province put in additional funding for the auditorium. And that came through the, I think through a lot of work in the community and through the province reviewing the base costs of that plan and then making the additional commitment. So, but that's the only example I can think of in Vancouver where something has happened beyond the capital plan request and the capital plan response letter. Even Cole Harbour went through that process, even though there's no money attached to the school.
Right, and the Hammer was a sort of an active case with a somewhat of an amendment rather than something completely. Okay, with regards to this recommendation, as it came from the board, it has to go back very quickly. Yes.
Thanks, through the chair. So just a question about the process. You just mentioned that this has to go back to the board, but my understanding is that it is at the committee for discussion of whether or not it goes back to the board, and that's how the process has worked to date, correct?
Since this came from the board, it has to be decided upon how we move forward or not move forward. How's the recommendation? So it, no matter what happens at the committee, it has to go back to the board for discussion and final direction. So the recommendation is either to stop the whole thing or to go proceed to consultation. So it has to go to the board. If I can get, if staff wants to clarify.
Yeah, just to clarify that, the recommendation in the report refers to the Facilities Planning Committee report to the board. So the Facilities Planning Committee needs to report its recommendation or report back to the board, and there will be, as is always the case, there's every committee meeting there's a report back to the board. So this will go back to the board for further consideration.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. So through the chair, as a member of the Facilities Committee, I wouldn't support this recommendation.
Sure, okay, and I can cut the rest. Barb?
Sorry, Chair. The committee members, the trustees who are committee members could make a recommendation to the board.
Yes.
Other than just sending it back to the board, they could say that we recommend that we initiate a public consultation process, or this committee could recommend to the board, because it's the board that has the final say, that no further action or duty or study be required. Correct. Or they could just send it back to the board, right?
Correct. The committee may make a recommendation, but the ultimate decision will go through the board, and all 9 trustees will make that final decision. If I look at the committee members that if they want to make a recommendation, do you have a, oh, Amanda wants to.
As a point of order, just
Yes.
Can we get the explicit vote from each committee member, please?
Sure. If everyone's comfortable. Right. Okay. Thank you. Yes, we can. Okay. We'll look at.
Yep. So not recommending further action.
Not recommending further action.
I'm not recommending further action either.
Okay. So the committee will recommend no further action, and that will be going to the board as the committee's recommendation. The decision itself will be made by the board, just to be clear. Yeah. All right. Agenda item, and thank you, agenda item 2.1, Carleton Elementary verbal update. Jim? Through the chair. Do you
want to wait for everybody to depart.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you, Jim.
Okay. Through the chair, this is an update to Carleton, just a bit of history on it. Due to a fire in 2016, Carleton Elementary has since not been in use. The district, however, has provided bus service to students residing in the Carleton area that attended Carleton to attend Cunningham Elementary. Not all the students attended Cunningham Elementary. However, bus service is provided to that school. Our project definition report for the seismic upgrade project has been completed and work is underway to finalize the funding approval summary report, which will be brought back to the Vancouver Project Office Steering Committee for review and decision in the future.
It's a short report. Any questions or comments? Joanne.
So through the chair, can you give us a sense of the timeline for when you anticipate that happening? Because I know that for teachers who were at Carleton who are now at Cunningham, although they are housed in a separate school, they run and function as two separate sites, you know, within one building. And so that's, you know, a question that we get often is just kind of what is the update and what's happening with that, because they still identify as Carleton teachers and have a separate, you know, administrator and that all. So it would be great to get a timeline for when to expect that.
Through the chair, we continue to work with the ministry to get a decision on the project, but no decision has been forthcoming yet. So we remain hopeful that a decision will be coming soon, but we do not have a time frame.
Arjun?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I know decision is going to come from the ministry. We did talk about like few options, so can you refresh our memory? Like what option are we putting forward for Carleton?
Options like upgrade or replacement, that type of option?
Right, I think we did talk in the past that it'll be like Carleton will be the school will be back to Carleton and the rest of the building will be used as swing space, or it will be fully swing space. You know, there were a few options I think we talked about, or I think there was some one time we were talking about having some kind of like development being done on part of it.
Through the chair, the only considerations at this point is to, one, fix the fire damage and to use the school as a swing site. The other options are the standard options that are explored when we do a PDR or project definition report, and that is the seismically upgrading it, a partial option of partial seismic upgrade and replacement, or a full replacement.
Yes, Sergeant.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up, this was 3 years ago when we had fire. You know, can we see like what, like, you know, it was the delay from the ministry, was a delay from the insurance company, or why it's taking so long that damage to be repaired?
Through the chair, because we are self-insured, SPP, which is the insurance that the province carries, did repair the damage, the water damage, and the immediate fire damage, and they dried out the building. So at this point, the building is stabilized with respect to not having any further damage as a result of the fire. But a majority of the interior finishes are not currently in the school because they had to remove them all. So there is significant work to either make the school usable by doing fire damage repair or to pursue another option. I can't answer the question as to why the decision has taken so long. I think we've been been working with them to try and get a decision.
So characterize it as we're waiting for the ministry. It's in their court. Pretty well. Okay. Thank you. All right. Anyone else on that one? No. All right. The VPO Memorandum of Understanding. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, there was a board motion back in May. Motions were passed, two motions. One, that the board engage with the Ministry of Education in a renegotiation, the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, and further that to have a trustee serve on that steering committee. So the Chair sent a letter to the Ministry of Education, and we did receive a response. That response is in the package, is as attachment A in the report. The minister's response at a high level indicates that the ministry's willingness to renegotiate the Memorandum of Understanding. However, the letter did indicate that the ministry would not be supportive of the district selecting or presenting a preferred option prior to government approval of a project. And secondly, it indicated that the steering committee is an operational committee. It doesn't include MLAs, ministers, or trustees, and as such, having a district trustee on the committee would also not be supported. So this report is an information report. It's in the package. That concludes the report. Oh, yeah, the questions. And just in closing, the MOE in the district would be reviewing any suggested amendments before the MOE is updated. And so I'd be happy to take questions.
Is there a particular timeline with regards to, or time frame of the last comment of the steering committee receiving that and then making it known to the?
I think some of the work is actually just starting underway at the staff level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Barb and then Amanda.
I have a process question. So the recommendation that's reported is for information. So there's no motions or anything. If we accept this report for information, are we accepting the contents of the report?
I would say through the chair that this is accepting the information as information. It's not necessarily an endorsement of any of the items in the report.
Thank you. I have a major concern of the feeling of inequality in this committee, where I would think that we were joint partners. We have two, they have two. That kind of implies joint partnership. But when a ministry replies, before we even sit down and negotiate with them, that they're not going to allow this and not going to allow that, well, that's not an equal footing where they get to determine. Do they get to determine the membership on this committee? They do.
They did, yeah.
So there's nothing in the memorandum of agreement that we have agreed to that says 2 and 2.
We both signed off on it.
So it is an agreement. But if we want to amend it, they have power over us.
More or less, yes.
Well, that just doesn't make any sense at all to me. So like, I'm not. So that was my question. I'm not accepting that answer from the ministry.
That was to move ahead the projects, size of projects. Oh, okay. Well, one comment is, Barb, Trustee Parrott, that there is the opportunity not to renew it. But I was around at that time where nothing moved ahead. So we have to balance that. Oliver, oh, sorry, before Oliver, Amanda.
Hi there. Through the chair, will there be an opportunity for stakeholder input on suggesting amendments or to review suggested amendments before an updated MOU is signed?
I think before an MOU is to be signed, I have to think whether it's going to go to the steering committee and then the board can discuss. where, so I'm not sure at exactly what point, but I think the committee would have it before we would be signing off again. That's my comment for this evening. Oliver, oh, was that it, Amanda? Yeah, okay. Oliver.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. That was just what I wanted to confirm, that it was going to come back to the board for final approval.
Because I think we have to sign off on it, so the chair has to sign off on it. All right, that's it. Terry?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to frame this as a question. Just following on Trustee Parrott's comments, I think that as teachers, we have some concerns about the quality of advice that the minister is currently receiving as well. Just with respect to this committee being characterized as an operational committee, it just seems that some of the work that this committee completes really is more than operational. It sets the direction of what should really be policy discussions for how the board, the trustees voice, and the board's input into how it configures its facilities. It just seems surprising that out of hand, just the one element of this, that having a non-voting trustee representative on the committee would be dismissed out of hand, just even in an observer capacity. So I guess that's not a question, but I would say, do you agree?
You tried, but we hear what you're saying there, Terry, and thank you. All right, next, Jennifer, yes.
Thank you through the chair. Thanks for presenting the letter. I too had trouble kind of making heads or tails out of this in reflection on the LRFP consultation process, which values consultation and openness, and knowing that seismic mitigation projects are also part of our facilities and not having the openness. So just the inherent contradiction there is confusing.
David?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to maybe suggest, given the lateness of the hour, that staff is prepared to we defer the long-range facility plan report update to another meeting.
Sure. Is anyone really itching to get the LRFP updates this evening? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, it is a lengthy meeting this evening, so we will have it at the next meeting, which is January, where's the date? November 9th or 6th. Got my dates. November 6th. Okay, so we'll move it forward. Amanda, you have us.
I'm a little concerned about delaying long-range facility plan, as it passed a year-long consultation thing back in May, and we're now in October. Now we're not even going to talk about it till November.
Okay, are you talking specifically about the LRFP, the post-BC bid? Closes on October 18th. Well, we still have to wait for that anyways. I'm looking at number 14 here.
Well, number 1 is coming up with a committee that would start meeting in November if we wanted to do that one.
Okay, I think those are proceeding. Like those things are proceeding, if I'm correct. Yeah, that was just going to be an update on these. I think everything is proceeding. It's just an update on the LRFP, and I think John Dawson was going to provide an expansion with regards to recommendations 7 and 13, and that is not time sensitive, that we have to move, but the other agenda items, they are moving forward. On number 1, number 14.
All right, maybe I'll submit my questions in advance of the next meeting so they could be.
Right. Or if there's something pressing, if you can send it to myself, Jim and David, and then we can try to address those quickly. But I think everything that I've read, they're moving forward. This was just an update. Yeah. Thank you. All right, Josh? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. I know facilities and planning is, we always go long, but there's so much stuff to be discussed, and to be fair to everyone, to be able to listen and hear from everyone, we have to do it this way. I'm getting a thumbs up from Josh, thanks. Barb.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I may, I am thankful that we live in Vancouver, the most beautiful city in Canada and the best country, I think, in probably the world. And so that's what I'm going to be thankful for on Monday. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving and finds something that they're thankful for as well.
I like that. Thanks, Barb. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.